All right, I'm far from being the first person to approach the topic of science versus religion, but I think that I've got something a little bit different to bring to the conversation. Let's have science on the left and religion on the right. My suggestion, as you've probably seen from the title of this video, whatever I decide to call it in the end, is that the science-religion question is the wrong question. I think that we should be looking at realism versus idealism. Now, there's a big problem with this conversation. And the first is that the word realism means lots of different things, and the word idealism means lots of different things. And the second big problem is that realism, one of the main meanings of the word realism, is somebody who is well grounded in reality, okay, is a realist. Somebody who's not got his head up in the clouds is a realist. Somebody who's got a good idea of how reality really works is a realist. The same thing with idealism. The main meaning of the word idealist is someone who's got his head up in the clouds, somebody who's got an idea of how things should be and can't make the difference with how things really are. But that's not the realism and idealism that I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the realism established by Aristotle and the idealism established by Plato. Realism means that you believe that the basic building block of the universe is the atom. An idealist believes that the basic building block of the universe is consciousness. So two very fundamentally different points of view. Okay, so a realist believes that consciousness arises from atoms coming together in the right configuration. An idealist believes that atoms exist within consciousness. Let me make it very simple. Okay, the realist scientist is going to think to himself or herself, you've just described science. Okay, science believes that atoms are the core of all existence, and when atoms come together in the right configuration, they have, in this case, created consciousness. You may be surprised, if you're a realist scientist, to find out that that's actually what realist religious people believe in. And you may also be surprised to find out that that's what the majority of religious people believe in. Now, the main difference between these two sides of the divide is that the realist scientist says that the atoms come together by chance, and why wouldn't they, after so much time, to form a brain? Okay, so there's been so many configurations of the atom that it makes sense to the realist scientist that they would eventually configure themselves into something that does create consciousness. Okay. Now, the religious realist also believes that atoms are brought together, all right, into a particular configuration which creates a brain, which once again generates consciousness. The only big difference is that the religious realist believes that there is, let's give him a beard, a God outside of reality who sets the laws within reality that then configures the atoms, that then creates the brain. And this God also, in some of the religions, comes into the physical world and experiences what it's like to have a brain, and so on and so forth. But you can see that the only difference between these two models is this. The scientist says there's really no need for anything to put it all together. Given enough time, these atoms will come into a configuration that does generate a brain and in turn consciousness. Right. These two views are utterly incompatible with each other. Someone who believes that there is no one who configures these atoms can never agree with someone who believes that there is an intelligence who configures these atoms. Now, what does the idealist believe? The idealist believes that the basic prima materia, the basic material on which all of reality is created, is consciousness. And everything exists within consciousness. Let's get to the religious idealist. Well, the religious idealist says that in the beginning there was consciousness. Right? Not in the beginning there was a guy sitting on a cloud, because where did the cloud come from? Where did the guy come from? Right? But no, the idealist religious person, and this is the majority of the mystic schools from all the branches of religion. And by the way, the idealist religious people are absolutely shunned by the vast majority who are realists, in the same way as they are the idealist scientists, such as Rupert Sheldrake, Nikola Tesla, and others. They are absolutely rejected by the realist scientists, because the realist scientists don't understand this. It doesn't fit with their model of how the world works. Okay, so the religious idealist says that in the beginning there is consciousness, pure consciousness, and it's got nothing to be conscious of, so it doesn't realize that it's conscious until it notices itself, at which point it does realize that it's consciousness, and it becomes divided, the consciousness itself and the consciousness's impression of itself. Okay, and then that divides once again, and then that divides once again, and it continues dividing, and it continues dividing all the way down and down and down into tiny little parts of consciousness, and this perfect one consciousness, religious idealists, this perfect one consciousness still exists. And the more you go down into the smaller divisions, the more you come into concrete reality. So the religious idealist says that actually the bottom part of this overall consciousness, the basest, densest part of it, is what we know as the material world. But then that's not all there is. You see, the idealist religious people say that there is then imagination. And then whatever imagination is to the material world, it has its own version of more abstract, less concrete version of itself, all the way up until you get to the what is known as the Godhead, which is unknowable and which is so abstract that it can't be imagined, it can't be reached from the imagination. Okay, so that is the model that is suggested by the Gnostics. It's suggested by the Sufis, by the Kabbalists, by the Taoists, etc., etc. All the mystic versions of religions who are rejected by the mainstream of religions. And then you've got the idealist scientists who say that actually the world is not something that is experienced by the brain, but rather the brain is something that is experienced by the world, which is consciousness, mind at large. If you read Aldous Huxley, he describes this very, very clearly in his Doors of Perception and Heaven and Hell. So instead of thinking of the brain as a generator of consciousness, the idealist scientist thinks of the brain like an antenna, like an aerial, which receives its consciousness from consciousness at large. Now, of course, it's that consciousness that it receives is trapped within an individual with an ego in that frontal cortex. And so, of course, that ego gives you the impression that this bit of consciousness is utterly separate from, say, that bit of consciousness, okay, which is also receiving its consciousness from mind at large. Okay. However, if you read, for example, Carl Jung, you find out that actually the consciousness part, the consciousness experienced by individuals, like people, is just the tip of the iceberg. If you dig deeper, you have the unconscious or the subconscious. And then if you dig even deeper, then you get to, it's what Jung calls the collective unconscious. Okay, so this is very similar to, let's say, a dream. Okay, when you're dreaming, every single element that you dream about, every single person that you dream about, they seem like individual things and individual people with individual consciousnesses. And yet when you wake up, you realize that it was all you all along. And you had interactions with those people in your dreams. But again, when you woke up, you realized that person in my dream was just an aspect of my consciousness. Well, the idealist view sees it in the same way as that dream. The idealist sees reality as one big consciousness, dreaming lots of individual consciousnesses, which arise and which have access to that overall consciousness. Now, the last thing to mention, of course, is that the idealist scientist and the religious idealist have no quarrel. In fact, the religious idealist sees science as a perfect way of measuring, making predictions about, improving, etc., etc., the material world. And the idealist scientist has got no problem with the religious idealist, because the scientist sees that, everything is consciousness, and therefore religion is a nice model for what there is in addition to what we already know about the physical world. There are levels of reality that go beyond the physical world, which the idealist scientist isn't afraid of. And so over here, what we have is absolute cooperation between the two. So to sum up, this is what I'm asking. Wouldn't it be more constructive to consider the realism versus idealism question rather than the science versus religion question? Because if we ignore this, then this is essentially where the argument lies, and we can never come to any kind of agreement. Whereas if I would suggest evolve to this way of thinking, then science then becomes a tool for religion, and religion becomes a tool for science, and we can progress and look beyond what is just in the material world and maybe see where there is just find new frontiers, explore new worlds which this model is never going to allow for. So those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think below. Give me a thumbs up if you liked the video, and if you'd like to see more like this, and if you're not subscribed yet, consider subscribing down here. I'd be very, very grateful for any of your thoughts, and I will see you very soon. Bye.